The recording button was about to be pressed when Amy Winehouse said stop. Everyone in the studio froze. Her hand raised in the air, headphones sliding down to her neck, eyes fixed on something invisible beyond the soundproof glass. The producer held his breath. The engineer's fingers hovered over the console. $3.5 million hung in the silence of that London studio, and Amy Winehouse had just put everything on pause with a single word. But this moment didn't begin here. It began 3 weeks earlier, with a phone call that would test everything Amy believed about her music, her voice, and herself. The year was 2007. Amy Winehouse was at the height of her career. Rehab had become an anthem. Back to Black was breaking records across continents. Her voice, that raw, devastating instrument that could break hearts with a single note, had made her one of the most sought-after artists in the world. And then came the offer. It arrived on a Tuesday morning. Mark Ronson, her producer and collaborator, called her at the small flat in Camden where she'd been working on new material. His voice carried that careful tone people use when they're about to change your life. "Amy, I need you to sit down for this one." She lit a cigarette, stared out the window at the gray London sky, and waited. "There's a beverage company. Major global brand. They want you for their campaign. Not just your song, they want you. Your voice, your image, everything. They're offering £3.5 million for a 60-second commercial." The number hung in the air like smoke. £3.5 million. For 60 seconds. For 1 minute of her voice selling something she'd never tasted, promoting something she'd never believed in, becoming something she'd spent her entire career refusing to be, a product. "They want Valerie," Mark continued. "But with different lyrics. Corporate-approved lyrics. They've already written them. Professional copywriters. They say it'll reach 500 million people globally." Amy didn't respond immediately. She took a long drag from her cigarette, watched the ash grow longer, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. "When do they need an answer?" "They want you in the studio next week. They've booked Abbey Road. 3 days of recording. First-class treatment, full creative team, the whole package." But what Mark didn't know, what nobody in that moment could have known, was that Amy had made a promise to herself years ago, a promise she'd written in a journal when she was 17 years old. The journal entry was dated 1999. Amy had just been rejected by a major label for being too jazz, too niche, not commercial enough. In her small handwriting, between sketches of microphones and musical notes, she'd written, "If I ever make it, I'll never let them change my words. My voice is mine. My songs are mine. The day I sing someone else's truth for money is the day I stop being Amy." She'd underlined it twice. Now, 8 years later, that promise was being tested by more money than she'd ever imagined, by an opportunity that most artists would accept without hesitation, by a choice that seemed obvious to everyone except her. She told Mark she'd think about it. But thinking, for Amy, meant feeling. And what she felt was a growing unease that kept her awake at night, that made her music sound hollow in rehearsals, that turned every conversation about the commercial into a weight pressing down on her chest. Her manager called. "Amy, do you understand what this means? This isn't just money. This is legitimacy. This is mainstream acceptance. This is your chance to reach people who would never hear your albums." Her label called. "Think of it as exposure. Think of it as art reaching new audiences. Think of it as evolution." Her father called. "Love, it's just 1 minute. 60 seconds. You've done longer concerts in worse condition. Take the money, secure your future." Everyone had a reason. Everyone had logic. Everyone had an angle. Everyone except Amy. She showed up to Abbey Road Studios on the scheduled day. Not because she decided, but because she hadn't decided, and some part of her hoped that being in that legendary space, surrounded by the ghosts of the Beatles and Pink Floyd, would give her an answer. The studio was perfect. They'd imported her favorite microphone from New York. Set up her preferred lighting. Stocked her preferred drinks. The engineer was someone she'd worked with before, someone who understood her process, her quirks, her need for authenticity in every take. The producer was polite, professional, enthusiastic. He showed her the storyboard for the commercial, sun-drenched beaches, beautiful people, her voice as the thread connecting moments of joy and freedom. It looked expensive. It looked professional. It looked like everything except her. "We've kept the melody of Valerie," he explained, sliding the lyric sheet across the console. "But we've adapted the words to fit the brand message. It's still your sound, your soul, just redirected." Amy picked up the sheet. "Read the first line. Read the second." Each word perfectly crafted to sell, to persuade, to convert listeners into consumers. Not a single word was hers. She looked up at the producer, at the engineer, at the assistant holding the expensive headphones, at the corporate representative, in the corner checking his watch and his phone and his investment. And something broke inside her. Not violently, but quietly, like ice cracking under weight it was never meant to carry. Subscribe now, because what happens next will show you why Amy Winehouse became a legend, not for what she sang, but for what she refused to sing. She put on the headphones. Stepped up to the microphone. The engineer adjusted levels. The producer gave her an encouraging thumbs up. The track began to play, that familiar Valerie rhythm she'd performed hundreds of times, but now dressed in corporate clothing, stripped of its soul. She opened her mouth to sing the first line. And couldn't. The words stuck in her throat like foreign objects. Her body, that instrument she trained since childhood, that vessel for emotion and truth, physically rejected what she was being asked to do. She tried again. Got halfway through the first verse. Stopped. The producer's voice came through the headphones. "That was great, Amy, but can you give us more energy? More brightness? Think celebration, think joy." She tried a third time. This time she made it through the full verse, hitting every note technically perfect, emotionally empty. Her voice sounded like someone impersonating Amy Winehouse. Technically accurate. Spiritually absent. The recording button was about to be pressed when Amy Winehouse said stop. Everyone in the studio froze. She removed the headphones slowly, deliberately, like someone removing shackles. Stepped back from the microphone. Looked at the producer through the glass partition. "I can't do this." The words came out quiet, but in the dead silence of that padded room, they landed like thunder. The producer smiled, thinking it was technical. "We can adjust the key if you want. Change the tempo. Whatever makes you comfortable." "No," Amy said louder now. "You don't understand. I can't do this. I won't do this." The engineer glanced nervously at the producer. The corporate representative stood up from his chair. The air in the studio became dense with confusion and the beginning of panic. "Amy," the producer said carefully, "can we talk about this? Step outside for a moment." She walked out of the vocal booth, through the control room, into the lounge where they'd set up refreshments and comfortable furniture, and everything designed to make artists compliant. The producer followed, along with her manager who'd been waiting outside, along with the corporate representative whose £3.5 million investment was suddenly in jeopardy. "What's wrong?" her manager asked. "What happened in there?" Amy sat down, lit a cigarette with shaking hands, and for the first time since the offer arrived, found the words to explain what everyone else had been too busy to hear. "When I was 17, she began, "I got rejected by every major label in London. You know what they all said? Too jazzy. Too retro. Too authentic. Not commercial enough. And you know what I did? I went home and I wrote in my journal that if I ever made it, I would never change my words for money. I would never let anyone else write my truth." She took a drag, exhaled smoke and years of pressure. "That's not just some teenage promise. That's who I am. My voice isn't just sound, it's intention. It's feeling. It's me distilled into notes and words. And those lyrics in there?" She gestured toward the studio. "Those aren't my words. They're marketing. They're selling. They're everything I promised myself I would never become." The corporate representative stepped forward, his voice smooth with practiced persuasion. "Amy, We're not asking you to change who you are. We're asking you to reach new audiences, to grow, to evolve. No, she said firmly. You're asking me to lie. You're asking me to use my voice, which people trust because it's real, to sell them something that has nothing to do with me. You're asking me to break the only promise that matters. But here's the part no one expected, the part that changed everything. She stood up, walked back into the studio, and sat down at the piano in the corner. Without asking permission, without explaining, she began to play. Not the commercial jingle. Not the adapted lyrics. She played "Love is a Losing Game," one of her rawest, most personal songs. Her voice, free from corporate direction, filled the studio with that devastating honesty that had made her famous. Every note carried weight. Every word meant something. This was Amy Winehouse, unfiltered, uncompromised, undeniable. When she finished, the silence in the studio was different. Not uncomfortable, but reverent. She turned to face the room of professionals and executives and handlers. "That's what my voice sounds like when it's telling the truth," she said quietly. "That's what you hired me for. Not that sanitized, corporate-approved version. This. The real thing. And I won't dilute it. Not for £3 million. Not for 30 million. Not ever." The corporate representative started to speak, but her manager held up a hand. "She's right," he said, surprising everyone including himself. "She's absolutely right." The deal died in that room. £3.5 million walked out the door. The corporate representative made some calls, threatened some lawsuits, eventually accepted that you can't force authenticity, you can't purchase integrity, you can't buy what Amy Winehouse was protecting. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that some things are worth more than money, and subscribe because the impact of this moment changed everything. The aftermath was complicated. Her label was furious. They'd counted on that commercial money, on that mainstream exposure, on that validation from the corporate world. Some journalists called her difficult, unprofessional, self-destructive. But something else happened too. Artists started reaching out. Established musicians sent her messages of support. Young singers cited her as inspiration. Because in an industry where selling out is expected, normalized, even celebrated, Amy Winehouse had drawn a line. 3 months later, Back to Black went to #1 in 17 countries. Not because of commercial exposure. Not because of corporate backing. Because people recognized something real in a world of manufactured sound. At the Grammy Awards that year, she won 5 trophies. During her acceptance speech for Record of the Year, she said something that didn't make sense to most of the audience, but meant everything to those who knew. "This is for everyone who ever told me I wasn't commercial enough. Thank you for being right." The journal she'd written in at 17, the one with the promise about never changing her words, she kept it until the end of her life. After she died in 2011, her family found it among her possessions. The entry from 1999 was dog-eared, the pages worn from being read and reread. But there was a new entry, dated 3 days after she walked out of Abbey Road Studios. In her handwriting, slightly neater now, more certain. "Today I kept my promise. It cost me £3.5 million and probably some opportunities. But I can still look at myself in the mirror. I can still mean what I sing. And that's worth more than all the money in the world. My voice is still mine." The commercial never aired. The beverage company hired someone else, some manufactured pop star willing to sing whatever lyrics would sell the most product. The commercial was forgotten in weeks. Amy's decision is still remembered. Because that moment in Abbey Road Studios, when she said stop and walked away from millions, wasn't about being difficult or self-destructive. It was about understanding that once you compromise your art for money, you can never fully trust yourself again. Once you let someone else write your truth, your voice stops being yours. The legacy of that refusal lives in every artist who says no when the pressure says yes. In every musician who chooses authenticity over exposure. In every singer who remembers that the only thing more valuable than your voice is your right to control what it says. Amy Winehouse died at 27. Too young. Too talented. Too raw for a world that wanted her polished. But she never sang words that weren't hers. She never sold her voice to the highest bidder. She never broke that promise she made to herself at 17. The £3.5 million would have been spent by now, forgotten like most money is forgotten. But that moment when she removed those headphones, stepped back from the microphone, and chose herself over everything else, that moment is eternal. Because it proves something that the corporate world, the music industry, and the machine of commercial entertainment didn't want to admit. Integrity isn't just valuable, it's priceless. And some artists, the real ones, understand that the only voice worth having is the one that remains yours. Amy Winehouse knew that. And she never forgot it.